race was kind of like the unspoken thing on Eckerd's campus when I was there. It's kind of like we're singing Kumbaya, like we all like each other. The white folk are liberal, so we don't need to have dialogue or conversation about our race issues.
Just based on what my experience was, it was a little bit more diverse. I know there were a lot more international students, and I did also feel like there were more students of color also.
Everything has changed and nothing's changed, and that's true at Eckerd too. When I came to Eckerd in 1978, there were no black professors on the whole campus, and there were only 5 women out of 78 faculty.
I think we only have 3 African American professors.
Like Professor Paget and like 2 others.
Yeah, Walker and
Professor
Dr.
Walker,
Porter.
Professor Paget, and Dr. Porter.
I think that's it.
I actually think you're right. I can't think of anybody else.
Do you think that's weird or odd that you don't have a professor of a different race for a teacher?
Eckerd College, a sprawling utopia of palm trees and smiling faces in Florida's Sunshine City, St. Pete, has been the home of hippie-loving environmentalists since 1958. The college has long been known for its forays in marine biology, its beautiful sunsets, its friendly community, and its fair share of wild parties. But that's not all. Eckerd, at first glance, could almost as equally be described with one word: white. White enough to make any claims of diversity a joke at best and a serious lack of awareness at worst. Don't get me wrong, Eckerd is pretty friggin' great, but because it's so great, it merits being even better. Being the best. For everyone. But first, we've got to pop the bubble. In the spring of 2017, Dr. Ronald Porter, Eckerd's Director of Service Learning, introduced a course in order to discuss issues of race, ethnicity, and power, especially in our changing world. White nationalism is on the rise. There was a ban on people from Muslim countries. The disproportionate amount of black people in jails is staggering. Racism is real, regardless of the safe spaces, the school clubs, the color blindness of the 2000s, our first black president. There's a disease of consciousness, and race is at the center. In order to address it, we were tasked with making this documentary film to explore and explain the topic of race surrounding Eckerd, St. Pete, and the world. We interviewed lawyers, directors of nonprofits, Eckerd faculty, students, and staff, hoping to gain insight on ways we can make our home more reflective of us and what we want the world to be. So we took to the streets of Eckerd to see just what our community is thinking about race.
What are your feelings towards labeling Eckerd College as diverse?
If we want to talk about, I'm trying to think of what ways Eckerd is diverse. The majority of students that go to Eckerd are from the southeast. I don't really think there's a lot about Eckerd that is diverse.
Yeah.
Maybe the faculty and where the faculty come from and what institutions they come from might be diverse, but racially, Eckerd is actually not that much different than the average American college. We're talking less than 20% of the students are people of color. When we look at Eckerd's demographics, we're seeing maybe 2 or 3% African American. Mm-hmm. We're seeing less than 1% Native. We're seeing maybe 10 to 12% Latino, and we're maybe seeing somewhere between 5 and 8% Asian. That's a pretty average demographic for ethnic minorities at any college campus. So I don't want to say that Eckerd is less diverse than other places. Because we're so small, it's more apparent.
I feel like the students would benefit if Eckerd were more racially diverse because it would support the goal of the liberal arts education to provide students with a well-rounded perspective on the world. In many ways, Eckerd is very, very monolithic. The vast majority of people here are from a very similar socioeconomic background.
Do you believe it is so difficult for certain individuals to admit their privilege?
I think there's guilt involved. Who wants to feel bad for something they can't control? You know, I mean, some of us were born with certain colors, and it just so happens that a certain color of people has used their power worldwide and throughout history to have control over others.
Some people think that your skin tone dictates who you are, which it is who you are, but that don't mean people can judge you by that. My work environment here is you have some employees that are prejudiced here, and I won't say no names, but it is what it is. I still treat people the same way regardless of how they feel towards me and my skin color.
The white people, black people for me are the same because of where I come from, Dominican Republic. We don't have any difference in color. It's a white and black, the same person. I feel good for everybody.
There are so few non-white students at Eckerd, but virtually all of the maintenance staff and the people who work at the cafeteria and the pub and the housing people who people who clean our dorms and our bathrooms and things, virtually all those people are not white. I feel like at Eckerd we're being set up to think about the majority of white students here are being set up to think about non-white people as inferior to us just by the economic reality that it's mostly the white students who are their families are able to afford to send them here to go to school in a community where then it's mostly non-white people who provide essential services like cooking our food and cleaning our houses.
One of the big reasons I came to this school and my big argument for staying here is that there is so many different opportunities here, and yes, it is very expensive and it's like more money than my mom makes a year, but I didn't want to let the fact that I can't afford it stop me from having opportunities that other people can afford. And I think that a lot of the people that I know, especially back in my middle school, for example, they have kind of let being black define them in a bad or a negative way, and I definitely think that African Americans should see themselves in a beautiful and positive light. And then also one of the things I also noticed was a big deal with my hair. I used to wear my hair permed, and so it wasn't necessarily healthy or at a good length or a long length. And I wasn't necessarily a fan of weaves either. And so kids would always make fun of me and call me bald head or like just be really, really mean. And then but I also had this idea that light-skinned girls or guys are better looking than dark-skinned girls or guys. And that's definitely not true whatsoever. But because of like the elementary and the middle school I went to and like that kind of idea, I kind of accepted that as true. And now that I'm older and I've gone natural and I take care of my natural hair, I definitely have found so much beauty in my hair and beauty in myself and what my hair represents.
And so when it comes to a culture, these are people that look like you, they sound like you, they act like you. And so you kind of develop and you share many of the same things when it comes to like experience. And so you develop a lot of the similar perspectives on the world as the culture around you, which is good and not so good in many senses because cultures have been abused, appropriated. There's been a lot of abuse done to the perception. People talk about things like stereotypes and stigmas regarding certain cultures, and ultimately these have very profound effects upon how people within those cultures perceive themselves. And so when you grow up within those cultures, when you look around at how everyone perceives themselves, you begin to perceive yourself as well as that. Now, of course, I mean, as you get older, I mean, you always have a decision, you always have choices. But you're talking about a kid who's 5 years old, 8 years old, 10 years old, 15 years old, 20 years old, trying to come to grips with that that philosophy of, wow, I can really be anything.
Being black means, I guess, coming from such a long line or a long history of culture, either whether that's negative culture or positive culture, because through a lot of the things that happened when blacks were here in America, enslaved in America. Even though it was definitely a terrible time, a lot of beauty and a lot of culture definitely came out of it, with the use of head wraps and with the use of dancing and jumping the broom at a marriage ceremony. So a lot of beauty came out of that type of struggle. So I think that being black means embracing that and accepting that, but not letting that tough time or those horrible times restrain you from anything.
I mean, you think of the school as very liberal and very open and embracing diversity, but I don't think that it's proactive. In other words, I don't think that there's deep-seated antipathy, or entrenched institutional racism. I think it's more of a lack of proactive.
Mm-hmm.
When there's pressure, things happen. If you let the pressure off, nothing's changed, but that the degree to which one would hope by this point that we would have achieved is a lot slower than I thought it would be.
The people in AAS are the people, it's the choir. Right? You know what I mean? And like, it's fun to preach to the choir the first time you preach, but by the 15th time, like, you want to preach to somebody else.
It pretty much does a large amount of damage to your perception of yourself and what you can achieve. And so you have it's like overcome that idea of what you can do. But these images and these ideas are perpetuated not necessarily by, they're perpetuated by the media, and they're perpetuated by different ideas that have permeated throughout, many, many years. And there's no real attempts in certain areas and certain cultures to really usurp these ideas. It's just kind of like a blind acceptance of, well, you know what, education is a white trait. So you're reading these books, boy. Yep, you're trying to act white. You're putting the INGs on your words. You're acting white. Pretty much that. Like I said, my options are limited if I come from a certain background. If I grow up in the hood, if I grow up in the ghetto. Bar's not up here for us. It's like, it's right here. It's like, stay alive. Reproduce, collect your welfare check. That's what's expected.
We know racism is still in our city. It hasn't changed, but you learn to deal with it. And by working, you have to deal with it. Because I've been here for so many years, and if I didn't feel like I was a value, I would have been quit.
But I feel like it really hurts the educational mission of the school that there's so little diversity in background, practically speaking. And I feel like that's one of the things the Eckerd bubble does, is it continues that idea that a lot of privileged people have, that their life is normal.
Do you view Eckerd as a part of the St. Pete community?
No, it's kind of like its own thing. It's like its own bubble.
A higher proportion of those who are in a minority group have higher rates of poverty, and they live in high-risk conditions, I guess is what you call it, so more often in bad neighborhoods. Those areas and the low income and lack of access can affect their health outcomes a lot. So maybe one person lives in a nice area of town and this person lives in a bad area of town. Well, we know exercise is important. Who's going to be able to go out and walk around their block and get some exercise? The person in the bad area of town is probably not going to feel comfortable going out and getting the exercise. They probably don't live near a gym. They probably can't afford a gym. So where are they really going to get their exercise? Then it comes down to food as well. So there is a food desert in South St. Pete, and it's not easy to get to a grocery store, and it's not easy to get to nutritious food. There's tons of fast food there, and if you are low income and McDonald's is closer than the grocery store, then you and your family are going to eat McDonald's. But if you live in another area of town where the grocery store or the organic market is right there and the fast food place is farther, well, then you're probably more likely to eat healthier there. The other thing is access to health care. So if you're low in poverty, you either don't have insurance, or maybe you do, but you still can't afford to see the best doctors or primary care doctors. So all of our patients, when they come here, there are people who do not have any kind of health insurance whatsoever. So they can't just go see the doctor anytime they want. They don't have the money, they don't have health insurance to begin with, so they come here. Absolutely, I think it affects their power. They're limited. We're not an option. We are the only thing they can do. Money equals power. So anyone in low income is powerless. They really just have fewer choices, and yet our society says, well, why don't you just do this to better your life? And it's kind of like, well, because it's not that easy for me. Maybe I work 2 jobs. Even to get here, they might have to take a couple buses to get here, and then they have to wait in the waiting room all day. You know, it's not like we try to make it as convenient and as accessible as possible, but it's still not the same as someone who gets to have an appointment at 10:30 with their doctor and drive there.
So I think a lot of white folks understand that history was messed up. Now, what do we want white people to do about it? You know, like, are we just going to blame them for the rest of our lives and move on, or is there another approach?
Because one of the things that we learned in that period was we could help change the society. Young people can do extraordinary things. Older people too.
One of the best ways to change the narrative around race in our country is to have a deep conversation about it. And not in a way where blame and guilt are added into the equation. What I do think is coming together and having a dialogue where we dismantle that together. Our current campus and maybe even our current country doesn't have like a full dialogue about what race even is or where it came from or what's going on. So people are confused and they're more interested in attacking others than they are in attacking the idea.
I love all students. They're pretty good students. I get along with everybody. Same goes for the faculty. It doesn't matter. I don't look at color, but I enjoy people. People are people, and it doesn't matter what color you are.
The key is that we have to diversify the faculty. We have to diversify the faculty. That's an issue, you know. And I think that there are many ways we can do this. You know, I've talked about reaching out to different professional organizations that are working closely with graduates of color, like the Gates Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Mellon Foundation and whatnot, you know, reaching out to different graduate institutions and whatnot. But I definitely think that that's the first step, because once you diversify the faculty, I don't just mean in terms of persons of color, but I also mean in terms of women of color also, then you'll begin to have students come on the campus and say, oh, okay, well, this is interesting. This is a diverse population. I feel like I'll be welcome.
The main issues, you got to be able to have an open dialogue with people, even if you find some of the stuff that they're saying is
Wow. So I think part of the advice would be to not allow any type of discrimination to happen in your presence.
There's a lot of things about Eckerd that perpetuates this idea of being in a bubble. We should make more of an effort to be involved in the greater community, like not just Eckerd, our own Eckerd community, but like, how do you break the bubble? Me? You're asking me? Yes. How do you break the bubble? I don't know. That's the question I'm posing. How do you know?
Safe spaces kind of give people an excuse to pretend like there's actual change happening, right? And also, it's very much used in a way that, you know, makes it so that white people, you know, can get away with not looking racist, right? The whole idea of like, oh, I'm not racist, but, you know, the but is the very important word in that sentence. And it generally just doesn't really do anything, safe spaces. So what we want is a space of risk where people can freely talk about everything.
God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, my country tears of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring, and if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring, and when this happens, and when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last,